This is Dave with Taboo Customs. Today we're going to do our second video on our shop house build here in this Morton building. If you missed the first video, go back, take a look at that, because it won't make much sense when we walk inside here. You'll see quite a bit of difference when we do. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through, we'll look at what we've done, we'll talk about some of the surprising things we've found, we'll take a closer look at those, and then we'll talk about our next steps. So as you can see from the first video, the building is a lot different now. The goal was basically to strip everything out that's going to be in the house area. There were several reasons for that. One being the building was so old. We figured we were going to run into a few things, and honestly, in our layout that we had created, we didn't have a whole lot of walls and other areas that were going to stay where they were at, so it was easier just to strip it all out. So let's talk about a few things that we ran into that we were surprised about whenever we tore out this section. One, timing. We way underestimated how long it was going to take to tear out. Now, we probably underestimated for a normal house, but this was a commercial building. So with this, everything was built a little heavier. There was wallboard everywhere. There was wallboard and then paneling, and then in some cases 2 sheets of paneling. And then on top of that, being that it's a building that was built in the 70s, it's had things added into it over the years multiple times. So we had a couple places where there was a wall and then an added wall and then an added wall. And so we had one spot where there was about 8 2x4s within about a 12-inch area, So some of that we didn't take into account, so it took us quite a bit longer, about 3 times longer to tear out than what we actually planned. So now, as far as things that we ran into that were surprising, one thing you might notice is there's no insulation in the walls except for a small, about 3/4 inch insulation board. We were told the buildings were insulated. Now, we don't fault the buyers for this, because we think people actually thought they were insulated. Because we ran into a section over on another wall that we'll show you in a minute where they replaced some windows, and when they pulled those windows out, they actually insulated where the window was. It was actually the only place in all of these walls where there was insulation. So that was a major surprise, and the next one we'll walk back and we'll show you here in a second. So I know you might be wondering, because I said there's no insulation in the walls, why there's piles of insulation in here. What they had actually done to insulate this building was they had a drop ceiling in here, and they had just gone and basically laid insulation over that drop ceiling, which was very inefficient. There's a lot of places where there wasn't any coverage, and then there's a couple places where there's 4 or 5 pieces stacked up on top of each other. Our plan is actually to do a ceiling that follows the trusses, since these trusses are arched, and then we're going to go in and actually reuse some of this insulation, lay it over that ceiling, and then do blow-in insulation around it to fill in all the gaps. Because one of the things we want to make sure we do is we want to make sure that our heating and cooling in this building is really efficient. Prior to this, they had 3-phase electric heaters in here, and the electrical costs were really crazy. And being that the building's not really well insulated, I can kind of understand why. So as I mentioned, to further talk about the insulation, like I said, I think that people thought it was insulated because whenever they did an addition, they insulated. So you can see here, this is a wall that was added, and they insulated it well. Now, for our other major surprise that we ran into, and honestly, for us tearing it out, we're pretty happy. We didn't run into a whole lot of issues or things that we, are going to be a problem. However, we did run into one other pretty sizable and something that you really got to watch out for, and that is termite damage. So we ran into this wall here, which on the other side of this wall is a bathroom. And apparently at some point they had a pretty good leak in those bathrooms, and whenever you get a house and you get a lot of water damage anywhere, and if it stays wet, it really gets to attracting the termites. Well, at one point they had a lot of termites in this area, enough that it affected this wall and a couple of the boards on the outside. Now, at some point, they took care of the issues. Either they had an exterminator come in and they drove the termites out of this area, and or it dried up and the termites just kind of, whatever, went away on their own. But they definitely knew about it, so they probably treated it, because you could see where they actually filled some of the holes left by the termites with spray foam, because it actually tore out some of the boards. Now, we were happy when we saw this and we did not find any termites. However, we'll walk over to another area where we found something similar. Unfortunately, not the same story. All right, so now for the worst thing we found as we went through the building. Talk about termite damage over in the corner. Well, this area here is actually where there were 2 bathrooms. And at one time, apparently, there was a window for each bathroom. And you can see here that they've covered that window up just with a sheet on the outside and screwed it in. Well, what they did when they did that was, and I assume they did that because the windows were leaking, because the boards in there were very rotten. When they did that, it didn't get sealed up real well. They left all of the boards there, and then, as I mentioned, they filled it up with insulation. So what happened is this whole section here of wall remained wet. So when we got over to it, got the bathrooms out, and we started tearing it out, that is really the only place we found termites. So we went in, we actually had cut they'd gotten bad enough that it affected the treated Morton Building 2x6s that ran across the outside. So we ended up having to go in and cut those out, and we'll have to replace those. We'll actually go ahead, we're going to take off of both of these 2 panels of the Morton Building, pull those off, replace those panels, putting 2 new boards in. The good news is that it looks like the termites stayed in that 2x6, didn't get into the heavily treated posts, so hopefully we should be safe there. So one last quick interesting thing we found in the building was the furnace for this side was actually on the other side of this door, and we're looking at it and wondering how in the heck, because they had registers along the bottom of the wall. Trying to figure out, okay, how did they get that register over here to this side of the wall from that door? And well, what it is when they poured the foundation for the building, they went ahead and poured just an underground passage for that air to go underneath the concrete and come up on the other side of the door. We aren't going to use this. We're actually going to use exposed ductwork overhead. So we'll end up filling this in and probably filling it with concrete, just the top. All right, so that's kind of the walkthrough of what we found now that we've torn out. As far as our next steps, we're going to end up starting to pull all of the electrical back. I know you see a lot of electrical hanging. As we went through and tore out, we did find a lot of circuits, and went back, shut those circuits off, and noted which ones they were. Now we're going to start taking all the circuits, stripping them back to the box so that we know which circuits we're actually pulling out. Trying to get we'll go ahead and get all of the electrical out of here, because we're going to redo all of the electrical. We already pulled all of the plumbing out as well, because we're going to redo that. So that'll be our next step, pulling the electrical. And then now that we have everything stripped down and we really understand where the plumbing in the floor is, because this is a slab, we're going to want to try to develop our layout to where we have to move that plumbing in the floor as minimally as possible, because we're going to have to cut the concrete out, run the plumbing to our new locations, and then pour new concrete. So as little as possible of moving that is going to be better. So next steps, working on the layout, pulling the electrical, and then preparing to actually probably work on the outer walls and get those set up first. But we'll cover all that in another video. So that does it for this video. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have any comments, get a hold of us at taboocustoms.com, or you can find us on Facebook or Instagram.